Hello, everyone. Thank you, Jose, for that. I just want to say I'm grateful that this space of dialogue between Christians and the left, European left, Marxist communists, that it exists. And I'm grateful for the things that the speakers shared. It was really interesting, giving me a lot to think about. I think most people, if they picture I've heard about Calais in the context of the big slum that was there in 2016 called the Jungle. But I mean, this happened, or this people have been crossing this border to get to the UK in a larger context over the course of 30 years, or since the early 90s. So I think it's an interesting kind of case study or an example in how borders move and change and are kind of recede in an importance and become more enforced too. But just since 2016, there have been consistently migrants, refugees. I think for the purposes of this talk, I'll use the word, the name exiled people to include those who had to leave their homes for different reasons. So I think it's important to understand Calais as a symbolic city, as well as, I mean, it's a physical place on the map, but also being right in the middle between Paris, Brussels, and London, these major European capitals. What happens here is the direct result of policies that are policies of deterrence that are co-produced between the French government, the UK government, and the EU. And if the topic is responsibilities, we see over and over again in pretty shocking ways how these governments fail in their responsibilities to people on the move, or to exiled people. So there's this winter, for example, there was 4,000 people that were sleeping outside in smaller camps, mostly between Calais and somewhere near Dunkirk, or just a half an hour north, called Lune Plage, near Grand Sainte, but just along the northern French coast. So the kind of the history, I mean, over the 30 years that people have been crossing, but especially since 2016, the French government has tried, the Interior Ministry has tried to have a policy of, they call it 0-point fixation, where they don't want anyone to ever establish anything like a permanent living site or permanent camp. So the way that that's manifest is in daily evictions or expulsions of these informal living sites, these camps. So there's not in Calais, there's not one big camp anymore. There's nothing that's administered by the government or by large NGOs. Instead, people are pushed to the exterior part of the city and invisibilized, so that it's the times where people become more visible that the government responds even more strongly with over dramatized shows of force. So these evictions, each living site is evicted every 48 hours. So if you can imagine people that are living with in very difficult conditions, it rains a lot here, it drops below zero in the winter time, in very unsanitary camps, because the municipality also refuses to take trash away. So there's there's children sleeping outside in places where there's rusted metal and rats, like really dangerous conditions, which is Well, so the evictions are, I mean, if we talk about kind of solidarity actors and humanitarian actors, one great group is human rights observers who try to observe these evictions and record the police, and in hopes that there will be less violence, because these evictions are often accompanied with quite a bit of police violence, and also with people's personal property, their tents, sleeping bags, blankets, being thrown away, along with whatever personal, items that they might have, including phones or pieces of paper that have what little, contact information to stay in contact with family back home. So, and if they have documents that support their asylum claims, often they can be lost or destroyed in this process as well, or what little money they might have. So yeah, it's a place where people's human rights are being violated regularly. So around, well, Calais and Grand Saint area, there are different associations that work together to address just trying to support, especially the survival needs of people, people on the move. So there's an association called Refugee Community Kitchen that cooks large amounts of hot food and distributes them multiple times per day. But along with this, there's always criminalization of solidarity, there's criminalization and intimidation. So during COVID, for example, the local government, along with the national government, they tried to limit or restrict where distributions could happen, including where people could get food. Eventually, they went to court, and I mean, they were fining the associations over and over, and large amounts of fines were building up. Eventually, a court ruled that this wasn't legal, and they had to return the fines. But there's also difficulties in access to water. The people have access to 10% of what the WHO says people need to live just healthy lives. So that's for drinking, but also for sanitary reasons. The French government does pay one association to distribute, food and water, but it's really dramatically insufficient for the needs of the people that are for exiled people that are stranded on this border. So in order to get to those places to get water, some people would have to walk over an hour there and back on a daily basis. Imagine, just people dealing with just their basic needs would take a lot of time and energy, which makes it more stressful, more traumatizing, and more difficult in their daily life. There's lots of different associations that all work together. Utopia 56, for example, will be kind of more emergency response, bringing people to the hospital when they need, or they'll be on the coast, driving in order to respond to people when they've had shipwrecks and are cold and wet and have, at risk of experiencing hypothermia, to give them what little food or they have limited access to sleeping bags or blankets mostly. But there's different associations that all work together in under a network called the Platform of Support for Migrants, and we have inter-associational meetings every week. So that's kind of how the solidarity actors manifest their humanitarian action, trying to work together. There's different groups like Calais Food Collective that tries to give dry food so that people have the option to cook for themselves if they're far away from distribution points, or so that they can have the dignity and comfort that comes with cooking the food that is more familiar to their own cultures. There's also Woodyard, which during the coldest months tries to distribute firewood so that people can cook over that and to stay warm as well. And there's Refugee Women's Center that deals specifically with the needs of women and children, families who are have particular needs. So, and then more recently, there's been Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders. It's been present as well. Also, Secours Catholic or Caritas in France has a big day center where thousands of people will come to charge phones, to warm up, to try to wash clothes or get a shower, and have some limited access to legal advice too. So there's big big needs because the state isn't taking responsibility. Their effort is always to push people away from the border. They don't want people to be close in order to try. So they're always trying to push people to accommodation centers that are over an hour away, that they could stay for 2 weeks, but at the end they would have to try to claim asylum in France, which doesn't fit for many different people for many different reasons. For example, when people have family in the UK, just like we heard about with the EU policy, the UK has, well, in general, there are no safe routes from Europe, from France, for people to get to the UK to claim asylum. There are for Ukrainians, from people from Hong Kong, very limited things for Afghans, and but not from Europe. So if people are already here, their only option is to take yet another dangerous trip by small boat, and that's it's another thing that is one of the terrible realities here, is that very regularly, every couple of weeks, every few weeks, people are dying stranded on this border, both in shipwrecks, but also on land, being as they try to enter trucks, being hit by cars, people freeze inside of frozen 18-wheelers, lorries. People are electrocuted, trying to get onto trains on top of the Eurostar. People are hit by trains very, very often. And these are usually, very young people in their early 20s, both men and women, and sadly children as well. Just this year, there's been 10 people that have died. And at the beginning of the year, there was a group of 5 people that died. One was 14, another 16. Just 2 weeks ago, a little girl from Iraq named Rula, who was only 7 years old, drowned. And yeah, as we heard a bit in the last, well, as we heard earlier, for me, more and more, I'll say these are. I'll kind of give a little disclaimer that this is. So if I give an opinion, it's my opinion, and not doesn't reflect the Anglican Church necessarily. But just seeing the way that nature is used, I guess this is connected with like biopolitics and necropolitics, but the way that nature is kind of utilized to enforce immigration, but enforcing it through death, it really blurs the line between killing and letting die. So if we talk about responsibility, oftentimes the government is very quick, and both the governments of the UK and France are very quick to point their fingers at smugglers. And there are horrible things that happen to people, horrible stories that I've heard of the way smugglers have abused people, but it's a more complicated story than that too, in that the environment that's, the smuggling is more a symptom rather than the cause. Or oftentimes in the UK, they're talking about breaking the smugglers or the human traffickers' business model, but that business model is created by the policies in place, these policies of France, the UK, and the EU. So I think that's one of the it's one of the hard things that I think that in order to better be responsible to each other, I think we have to face is that there are two different groups of people in in this kind of necropolitics or Mbembe's idea of there's some people that are allowed to live and some people that must die. I mean, it sounds strong, but I mean, you watch the ferry that goes multiple times per day, and you know the people that travel through the tunnel, and the difference between people just being their country of origin, even though they have a right to claim asylum in the UK, they're being denied that right, and it has deadly consequences. Another Well, something that we've seen more and more in the last few years too is the UK government has been giving increasingly more money to the French government to um, implement these policies, deterrence. And the last one was over the course of 3 years, more than €500 million. And we're beginning to see the effects of that, unfortunately, that people are dying within sight of French shore or closer and closer to the beach because they're under more and more pressure to cross in more dangerous ways. So if more small boats are being intercepted, there are more, like, smugglers are putting more people in each boat. So the averages used to be, well, they used to be see maximums of like 50, but now it's going as high as 70 in these very small boats that are not made for that. But also people are under pressure because they're being intercepted on days where the weather isn't very good at the beach by money that's coming from the UK, from France, by more policing. But that policing just puts more pressure on people to go before boats are inflated completely. Or, I mean, the police will come and they'll tear gas people often. There's been cases last year where that was the last interaction two people had with anyone outside the boat that they were in, was to be tear gassed. But they'll come and they'll take a knife and puncture the boats. But the pressure, you can imagine, it causes people to leave even more quickly. And that can have deadly results, that people are dying very, like, I mean, in a way we can imagine the border, I mean, it's this line in the middle of the channel between France and the UK. But for me, that's how I understand the border even moving to the part where the shore is between the land and sea. But of course, I mean, people on a daily basis have their movement restricted and stopped inland as well. So yeah, it creates this kind of space that's often becomes a kind of lawless space as well, where the French don't respect even their own laws, or where shocking things like police taking away people's shoes and making them walk out, all through the night, kilometers and kilometers. I've witnessed pretty shocking examples of racism on the train, for example, where the representative of SNCF, the National Train Service, will go and pick people based on, I assume, their black faces or looking like they're from the Middle East, and ask for their tickets, and say incredibly racist or overtly racist things. And there's been talk recently the buses in Calais are free, but there's a move in local politics to make them free for everyone, but not for migrants. And there's also been reports of migrants being forced to sit on the back of the bus. And also we've had people, well, so I'm connected with a house of hospitality called Maria Skopsova Catholic Worker House, and there's been people that have come back with numbers written on them. The police have, yeah, written numbers on people's hands. It's pictures that you can see where these are kind of just the examples of how these policies. Often we talk about dehumanization, but a lot of times I'm wondering if exiled people are really losing any of their humanity. I think they're being treated less than human often, but for me, I like this concept of Ubuntu, which is it's a word in a lot of Southern African languages. In South Africa, in the fight against apartheid, it was very important. But the idea of collective humanity, or I am because you are, and in that, I think if we oppress someone else, we oppress ourselves, we hurt ourselves. So for me, if we talk about, yeah, sentinels of humanity, I was thinking, I think we have to be, yeah, be careful with our humanity. Yeah, I'm working for a church, but my faith is important to me, and I think that for me, if people are created in the image of God and we're treating them less than that, it says more about us and more damage to our own humanity. I wanted to take just a little time, if I could. So I've been mostly connected to Maria Skopsova House of Hospitality. It's a Catholic worker house, or house in the Catholic worker movement. So I've been connected with different houses of hospitality, but this is the one. It's a community I really love. It's a place where there's a lot of beauty and a lot of hope, but also the people that are welcome there are often experiencing things that, yeah, more harsh realities that we don't always see. But this house is it's inspired by two women, and I think for the purposes of this dialogue between Christians and those on the left, I think these two people could be very interesting if people have heard about them, or if they, yeah, I think they'd be interesting to look into. So one is the person the house is named after, Maria Skopsova, Mother Maria of Paris, who she well, so both her and the other woman I'll talk about, Dorothy Day, who is one of the co-founders of the Catholic Worker Movement, they both had their kind of their start in being engaged in solidarity in connection with as communists with other communists, and then later in life came to religious life, the faith, and I think they could both be interesting in that they both lived their lives in this space in which we're having a dialogue between the left and the church, and continued to be anti-capitalist, continued to be anti-fascist in their actions and in the way that they lived their lives, and something happened in a special way in the church. So both of them. Oddly enough, had a connection to, well, so I mean, Maria Skopsova during, she lived in Russia during the time of the revolution, and uh, so she actually was, well, she at one point she was so angry with Tolstoy for disbanding the Socialist Revolutionary Party Congress that she wanted to assassinate him, and was talked out of it by other friends. So that kind of gives a picture of her at this moment of her life. And later, after the Bolsheviks came to power in 1918, she was actually elected to be a deputy mayor of a town, Anapa in Russia. But then as the White Army came in, the mayor fled and she became the mayor. So I mean, this kind of gives a bit of a picture, but the other connection to Tolstoy, for Dorothy Day, she actually interviewed him when he was in exile in North America and when he came to New York. But just to give a little picture, but both of them wound up opening houses of hospitality, or this was their way of taking responsibility, to be responsible for our brothers and sisters, for each other. And yeah, I think for me, I think that it's just an interesting way as I try to understand a lot of times in the associations in Calais, we talk about wanting the government to take responsibility or not wanting to replace the government in um, in the actions that we take. But I think it raises a lot of questions of we talk about not wanting to replace the government, for accommodation, for feeding people, for providing water, that the government should be doing these things, but at the same time, we know that it won't happen, at least anytime soon. So for me, I guess understanding what I want to be as a Catholic worker, as part of this Catholic worker movement, is thinking, how can we well, they talk about building a new society in the shell of the old, or trying to create something too. And I think that's how I understand this solidarity action and humanitarian action, even between these different houses of hospitality that we have in Calais, trying to be connected to each other. But then, yeah, there's an important idea of personalism in this movement, where so this is just a quote. I think it's a quote from Dorothy Day, but she took it from Dostoevsky. For know, dear ones, that every one of us is undoubtedly responsible for all men, not merely through the general sinfulness of creation, but each one personally for all mankind and every individual man. So I guess how I understand that is, I think it's good. I mean, that we should call for on a political level for things to change, to actually value the life of each child above, well, hoarding wealth. I think is how I understand what's happening in this reaction to. I mean, I think people have a scarcity mindset in this reaction to making borders stronger and costing people's lives rather than allowing them the opportunities to just come and to have free movement and to live where they choose to live. But yeah, for me, I have this question inside of myself a bit, like how can this change? How can this transformation come? And I think we need to act personally, and it's what I see. It's the encouraging thing that I see in Calais, amidst a lot of suffering that is caused by these policies. That the more people build these personal links of trying to be responsible to each other, I think for me that's how our society will be transformed. That's what I hope. But I think that's yeah. I think it's 5 o'clock, so maybe my time is up. But thank you so much for listening and for the invitation.
Yeah.